Hello and welcome to the West Ham Breakdown with me, Jack Elderton, and my mate Callum Goodall in a week where West Ham did pick up a crucial win in El Sacico. We do tend to do that, don't we? 2-1 against Wolves, following a really, really disappointing 3-1 defeat away at Leicester. We're going to talk about both games here in some depth. We're focusing mainly on Wolves. We covered Leicester over on Patreon for Tier 2s. We did a live show after the match and we'll be doing more of that over the sort of December and January period as fixtures pile up. We will be trying to do live shows here and there for Tier 2s over on Patreon covering that. And much like last week, it's going to be a pretty packed episode. So we've tried to separate things out. And usually where we do a player performance review feature in the middle of the pod, that is getting bumped over to extra time. So all the more encouragement to head over to patreon.com/analyticsunited. Sign up for a free trial. Like I've said before, you don't have to keep it. You can always cancel before you even have to pay. So a chance to sample the second half of the pod and all the other good stuff that we're doing over there. And I'm genuinely really proud of the stuff that we're doing over there. I think we do lots of great work. I really enjoy doing Euro review every week, even if at this time of year, it's pretty difficult to just cover West Ham, never mind another team that I know nothing about every week. But yeah, loads of good stuff over there. Really look forward to seeing you all there. And if not, enjoy the pod, which is going to be an interesting one this week. Because Cal, we were at the game. I don't know. It's a win, but it was mixed emotions coming away, wasn't it?
Yeah, 100%. It's given Groundhog Day, I think. One good result followed by two bad results followed by one good result, and let the cycle continue. And I think we're certainly both in agreement, and I would imagine most of the fan base are with us in agreement that it's just not a very good way to run a football club. Like, if you think, as all the briefing is suggesting, that Lopetegui is not really good enough, and you're saying, he's got one game, he will pick up those wins, like you say, against Wolves, those sort of desperate ones. It always seems to be the way, but if you've already got it in your mind that performances aren't good enough, and it's not exactly like it was a particularly convincing performance last night, like, we'll obviously break it down, but I think the level of performance that we saw off the back of the level of performance that we saw the result we saw against Leicester, really, we created a lot. But I think in combination, I certainly would be tempted to just be like, you know what we said about giving you that one game? Actually, we weren't really impressed enough, so we're going to move on. But yeah, obviously we have to be grateful for the 3 points. But when I zoom out, I still am extremely concerned, because I think Wolves were probably one of the worst sides I've seen at the London Stadium, even though they did manage to create a fair few chances. They just didn't really have anything about them in terms of cohesive structure or philosophy or tactic, and quality across the park seemed to be pretty low in a lot of areas. So to be put under the cosh, really, for large parts of the game, especially in transition, again, against that side is really quite alarming.
Yeah, the quality of execution in the final third and in many moments defensively from Wolves was pretty disastrous. I think if you were Gary O'Neill, I understood his frustrations really in the post-match press conference, where he was saying, £200 million of profit over several windows now. Started when he came in, having come out of a season where they finished on 39 points. Yes, there was some investment in that January that propelled them to a pretty good second half of the season under Lopetegui. But they've lost the vast majority of the core group of really good players, Raul Neves, Jean Moutinho, Max Kilman, Raul Jimenez, Adama Traore. There's loads of players there that they've lost, and you could really see it, I think, in the quality of their actions in many moments. João Gomes really should have scored. Great opportunity at the back stick. They had other chances as well in the game. I think there's one right at the start of the second half where Jenuary completely fluffs an opportunity to whip a ball across to Doherty, and then they eventually get that right later in the match. And by contrast, I think we were equally poor, lacked cohesion, lacked coherence in a lot of the things that we were doing. In fact, I would say the performance against Leicester, if you were to assess the two games, the performance against Leicester was better than the performance against Wolves. We were far better creatively as an in-possession side. against Leicester, lacked the final touch, and sometimes just kept out by some brilliant saves from Hermansen. Whereas in this one, performance was really poor, and we kind of had the opposite. We had quality in the final actions when we needed it. Fantastic goal from Bowen, and an equally excellent header from Soucek, the kind I've not really seen before, right?
The chipped header. It was great. I think, yeah, Wolves will be looking back at it and thinking, why was no one able to clear it off the line, given how slowly it moved across the box to the far post? But in their defence, it was actually an incredibly good finish in terms of where it was placed in the goal. So yeah, just a bizarre goal, but great to see Soucek scoring again. And I think his celebration was nice as well. I think he shouted about Antonio down the lens of the camera, which was nice to see.
Great in general to see the group come together in the way that they did. They clearly wanted to win for Mikel. We're going to talk actually about Mikel Antonio at length on Extra Time this week, talk about his career at West Ham. Obviously, terrible events, a couple of really anxious hours, I think, for everyone associated with West Ham. Really glad to hear that he is stable and okay, and according to Tomas Soucek, smiling and still good-humoured. And yeah, I think he's had very difficult time in the last few years, done very well for the club through that, and obviously I think everyone associated with West Ham wishes him absolutely all the best in recovering from this moment. And based on what he's done throughout his footballing career, at least over the history of his footballing career, I think he's got every chance of coming at this with the absolute right attitude to be able to come back and recover, hopefully very, very well. So yeah, back onto the game, and I don't know where to start, Cal. Where should we start? Should we just talk about kind of the thing that probably unites both matches, regardless of outcome, which is in both the Leicester and Wolves games, the transition defending, our ability to counter press, our ability to recover and defend counters was just absolutely awful throughout, and all of those issues that it seemed that we had gone a long way towards fixing, or at least some of the way towards fixing in the game against Newcastle, where we saw a much better West Ham performance, just seemed to have come back in the most terrible fashion in the last two games against two of the weaker sides in the league, where you're really saying Leicester, they scored 3, they could have had more, and Wolves won in this game, could have easily had 2, 3, maybe 4. They'll also feel unlucky over decisions. Definitely, I think they should have had 2 penalties. Not sure how the second one wasn't given. I mean, the second one is just so unbelievably blatant, clear trip. And then Bellegarde, to his credit, tries to stay on his feet, and then is tripped a second time by Mavropanos, kind of just like running into the back of him and clipping his back leg as well. So really, really strange, and so many scenarios on which I think we just have to count ourselves pretty lucky that we've not come away from these 2 games conceding 7 or 8 goals, really.
Yeah, 100%. It's frustrating to see, because it felt almost as if we're going into the games with a sort of mindset of, okay, well, it's only Leicester or it's only Wolves, and therefore the really good rest defence work that we did against Newcastle, who we see as a better side, and that's why we decided to defend a little bit better against. We don't need to really bother with that, because these 2 sides are just not going to punish us, so we can just commit an extra body forward. But in principle, I don't hate that idea if you're in good form and you're near the top of the table and you're playing well and you can rest on your laurels a bit. But we've got no laurels to rest on. Like, quite literally, our rest defence has been horrific. So I think build from the base and then add on is how you should be approaching it. It's like, okay, if we went to Newcastle with a solid base and managed to win 2-0, what we should do is keep the solid base. And then, because these teams are inferior in our mind, when we have those moments in the final third, we should be able to punish them even more, and they'll come more regularly. And that's how you approach the game. Not, oh, well, they've not really got the threat to punish us, which did obviously play out in the end against Wolves. So therefore, we're going to just overcommit and chance our luck that when they do break, they're just not going to be potent enough, which, I mean, we were so lucky last night that that's how it turned out, because I think even someone like Matheus Cunha, who's been in unbelievable form, there was moments in transition where the final ball through to his strike partner just wasn't quite accurate, or as we said, Jarrod at the back post. I think Strand Larsen didn't really get particularly good service. I think he did actually do a pretty good job for a big man of doing the sort of hold up play and spreading the play. There was one particular moment where he sort of took those sort of bounce in between the feet around and then spread the ball all the way out to the flank where there was a lot of space for the Wolves player to carry into. But then I think it was for the João Gomes chance actually at the back post. He was the one that facilitated the move in the first place. But I think on any other day, if a few more of Jenuary's crosses or a few more of Cunha's balls had been to slightly preferential positions, then Strand Larsen would have definitely bagged. And that doesn't even take into account all of the other chances that they had. So yeah, it was incredibly frustrating. And I just, as I said, I don't mind the idea of taking a slightly less defensive approach because you think you're safe against it, but there's nothing to suggest that we're safe against anything at the moment, because even the worst teams in the league are making us look incredibly vulnerable. So you've got to fix up your defence before you even think about trying to overcommit an attack.
Yeah, and I think even in terms of what you're saying, starts taking a slightly less defensive approach. It's just about how you structure how you deal with transition. Like I just don't think there's any real. Well, I mean, there's not any consistent idea of how we're going to do that, right? Because from game to game, within games, it's completely different. You put different players on the pitch, they react differently to those situations. Carlos Soler is the kind of player that wants to go and chase and force the first pass back, which I think is a good instinct and something that benefits us a lot of the time. But then if you put him with Edson Alvarez and Tomas Soucek, who really are two... I mean, Edson Alvarez is just, I mean, we're going to come to him later in this podcast, is just do whatever you like. You can never really predict what he's going to do next. And Tomas Soucek's probably a bit more of a recover-in midfielder, doesn't necessarily cover ground aggressively, particularly effectively when you want to use him as a presser. I'd say that's probably one of his biggest weaknesses as an out-of-possession player, is when he is forced to kind of buzz around and be aggressive as a presser. I just don't really think it works very well for him or for the team. So I just don't really see how that works. And then you put other players in who have entirely different approaches, also in terms of just where we're positioned on the pitch. So the Leicester game, for example, it's just bemusing what the gaps in terms of leaving Mavropanos all the way on the halfway line whilst the rest of the team pushes up. I get that maybe if Jamie Vardy is standing on the halfway line with him and you're worried about Vardy's pace in behind in transition, then I probably would want another centre-back back there with him. I wouldn't want to leave him just straight up 1v1 with Vardy. But in these occasions, or on those occasions, it's not even like there was anyone on the front line for Leicester. You've got Mavropanos standing 20 yards away from the next player for either side, which created loads of really strange situations where Leicester in transition were able to clear their box, and someone like a Buonanotte or an El Canous was able to receive the ball, turn under absolutely no pressure, and then charge forward, 15, 20, 25, 30 yards with the ball before releasing to one of the forwards. So really, really poorly defended situations, things that are not necessarily coming from individuals on the pitch, that are not necessarily coming from coaching or lack thereof off the pitch. At this point, frankly, if you detect a hint of extreme frustration in my voice, it's because I mean, what can you say at this point about this stuff? We've been talking about it since game week 1. We've been talking about it. We've talked about it after other games we've won. We came away from the Man United game, which we won 2-1. Frankly, in very similar fashion, with Man United missing lots of good chances, more than Wolves had, definitely, and also us benefiting from some pretty dubious decisions from the refereeing.
Yep.
And came away from that saying exactly the same stuff, that the transition defending was awful. It was the case before that, even in the season. And I think really, I know our job on this podcast is to do tactical breakdowns of the games that West Ham play in, but I've kind of run out of ways in which to talk about this. It's just... It doesn't look like there's any connectivity between what the plan might be, if there is one, and what the players are then doing on the pitch, especially when you see things like, in this game, 6 minutes into the match, first transition happens, one of the first big issues happen. We encounter one of our first sort of big problems in dealing with that in the match. And then straight away, you've got Edson Alvarez, Konstantinos Mavropanos, Max Kilman basically having a big discussion on the pitch over who should be where, who should be going out to what, players looking to the touchline, Lopetegui communicating things, arguments happening kind of throughout the game between Lopetegui and Alvarez, with, Alvarez turning to the touchline with his hands aloft or his hands outstretched, and Lopetegui giving instructions back, and it just looks like a mess, complete mess. And the output is very messy, and we're very fortunate to not be suffering more. And I think secondarily, it's not just what we do when we're defending, when we lose the ball as an attacking team. It's what we do as a pressing team. Some of our pressing is terrible. Like, I can see some of the ideas against Leicester. Like, I can see the intent to go from sort of goal kick situations, or from situations where Leicester are playing out from Hermansen, to go man to man across the pitch. But if you're going to go man to man, then go man to man. You can't go man to man and then have two players that are completely lost in the press, neither with a man nor covering a zone, and then leave yourself. Numerically, you should have enough on the back line. There's so many situations where we're 4v4 on the back line, but because we're not positioned correctly in that area, or you've got players that are a bit lost over where to be, it's very easy for Leicester to find free players on the back line. There's so many situations as a result where, Leicester were able to just kind of go one ball into midfield, back into the centre back, progress around the press, take 5 players out of the game, straight into a 5v4 situation and attack. You just should never be allowing in the Premier League. There are so few other examples I can think of, frankly, of Premier League teams in the last 4 years that we've been watching football in this way, trying to kind of look at every last minute detail, where I can think of teams that have allowed sort of the opposition number 10, or one of the opposition number 10s, to turn with the entire centre circle to themselves, and then kind of arrive into the final third with 3 or 4 runners up against just 4 defenders, with the only task of having to play the right pass to generate a shooting opportunity in the box. I maybe you see that in a season a couple of times from a team, but you don't see it every game from a team in the Premier League. I can't think of really any examples of teams that have done that.
No, not at all. And I think, not to draw too many comparisons, but I think of a team like Ipswich who have come up, and a squad that hasn't got a patch on us, quite frankly, but just in terms of the way that they've been organised, and sure, they've been together as a group for a while, but that's a team that's come up to a level that is way above a lot of the players that they've got, and even they're not getting turned over as regularly each. Like, okay, there might be not picking up wins, sure, but the manner in which they lose is far less, I would say, concerning than some of the chances that we're giving up, considering the relative level of quality in our squad, and sort of, as well, like, a lot of this team have actually been together for quite a while. Like, a lot of them are not new players. Soucek is still integral, whether we thought that he would be at the start of the season or not. Alvarez has been here for a while now. Bowen's been here for a while. Kudus has been here over a season now. Mavro's been, like, Fabianski's back in the team. Antonio's been up front for us for most of the season. So this is a squad that have played together, have played at this level, have played in Europe, and are committing sins that newly promoted teams are not even committing as regularly, which is a humongous red flag, and says a lot, I think, and this is one of my big concerns about the level of ambition that we actually have this season. And I'm growing increasingly concerned that the board might have looked at it and gone, well, we're probably not going to finish in Europe now, so do we just, like, why not wait if it saves us money? Because there's nothing on the table to go and chase, which is a scary position to be in, quite frankly.
Scary position for this podcast to be in, because let me tell you, it's going to be boring if that's the way that we're approaching what's left. We will have said it all by next week.
Yeah.
Right. I apologise, by the way, if the entire armed forces of the United Kingdom have been flying over my house while we've been doing this podcast. It's been very noisy for me and quite difficult to focus on everything Cal's been saying. So we're going to take a short break, and then we're going to come back to talk about in possession strengths, I would say, in the Leicester game, and then issues definitely in the Wolves match. Okay, so if we start with a brief summary of in possession stuff against Leicester, I think what we can say is a lot of that stuff was very good in that game, and we were really pretty desperately unfortunate to only score 1 goal, really, and for it to be a consolation goal right at the end. I think we created a lot. I think we used the ball very well, arrived in the final third very well, controlled the game quite well with the ball. I think we then made very poor decisions in defensive transition, as we've discussed, and that really limited our ability to control the game and hold on to momentum and stop, basically disallow Leicester from having any chances. Because it was the kind of game where actually I think the quality we showed in possession, if we'd matched that with what we did defensively, I think we would have had a vice-like grip on it and would have found it very easy. I also think we made some strange decisions in terms of the subs and changes of shape that happened in the game. It did smack a little bit of desperation. So we're doing a lot of things right from that sort of 3-box-3 base. And then on 2 occasions at the end of the first half and then at the end of the game, we kind of abandoned that for more of like a 4-4-2 with an extra striker. I think in both parts of the game, it really limited our success. It limited our control. It made it much harder for us to arrive in the final third. It made the game far more chaotic. And I think it really ultimately looked like a manager who was kind of throwing stuff at the wall desperately, hoping that something was going to stick and something would create that chance that unlocked things. I also think the decision to bring Soler and Soucek off together at the same time in the second half just was kind of disastrous for everything the team needed in that moment. And then take that onto Wolves, and I think actually you're looking at an approach that was just more about risk management without actually managing any of the risk, right? Just far worse at arriving in the final third. Take all of the negative elements that we saw in the Leicester game and slap them together for the Wolves match. And yeah, that's concerning because it looks like a coach that's watching things go wrong and then opting for the things that are going wrong rather than the things that are going right.
Yeah. I mean, that's a perfect summation of it, I would say. I think how do I say it? I think a lack of adaptation is obviously always frustrating, particularly now I've got the armed forces going over ahead, apparently. Maybe they've made their way from yours to mine. But yeah, I think a lack of adaptation, particularly given where we are, like, is concerning. And as you say, to pick out the bits that didn't work and just try them again is concerning as well. And then I think probably the most alarming thing for me was that obviously as a result of the horrible stuff that happened in the week to Mikel, we had to play Bowen up top, and I think he did a pretty okay job, but we just tried to do all the same shit but with someone who is way less physical up top. It was just like, you know what? I'm going to do what I do usually and just punt the ball long and hope that it finds someone. But more often than not, it was finding Totti's head, and Bowen was just like, oh, well, I'm not going to win that duel, so this is kind of pointless. And I was just like, what? Like, that lack of adaptation was just, I'd understand if your hand hadn't been forced almost, and your justification was that this is my tactic that I've come up with for this game, and I've done all of the prep and I've watched all the footage, and I really think this tactic's going to work. But when your striker is taken off the table and you cannot play him, and you have to play someone that has a completely different skill set up front, it goes without saying really that you should probably try and tweak a little bit how you play rather than just run it out the exact same way and hope that someone that's much less physical can pull out the same levels of performance that Antonio can. And frankly, no one in the Prem really can do what Antonio can do on a good day. So to build any system that relies on Antonio and try it when he's not there is nuts. So yeah, it was incredibly frustrating. That is not a dig at Bowen either. I thought he was fantastic on the night, and I think he made a lot out of scraps, really, which is what we've obviously come to know Antonio for, just in a different way. I think his way of picking up the ball in pockets of space was really nice out wide and sort of carrying, basically deciding that he was just not getting involved in that central centre-back battle any longer because he'd been hung out to dry, and then just was like peeling out a bit and linking up with Kudus a bit more, which was really promising. But yeah, as you've said, I think just bizarre to make those decisions in the face of the changes that he was forced into making ahead of the game.
Yeah, to sort of sum up as best I can, looked a bit more sort of 4-2-4, didn't it?
Yeah,
rather than
100%.
sort of 3-2-5 or 3-2-2-3 or whatever, 3-box-3 or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, and therefore more usage of more direct play into the front line. Soucek joining the front line, less of a kind of out-and-out central striker, I would say, for lots of the game. Bowen kind of more as a sort of right striker, Soucek more as a left striker, and then Soler and Alvarez helping him build up, often getting quite deep and close to the centre-backs. Full-backs not so 100% committed.
Mm-hmm. Which is damning, isn't it, when you say that we still looked absolutely shoddy every time we lost the ball?
This is the point. This is what I'm saying. Like, the only reason, really, I think that you would do this is if you're kind of, you're coming into a game that you absolutely have to win and you don't want to concede, and therefore you're going for the kind of like the ultimate managing risk approach. But you can't do that and simultaneously not manage any of the risk in the game, or manage risk so poorly and just give up chances in transition repeatedly like that. You lose all of the benefits of approaching the game in that kind of way. Had we done it a bit differently, more akin to what we've done against Leicester, I think we would have had success here. I apologise if I'm coughing. I've got a bit of a cold. It was absolutely freezing in the game.
It was so cold.
Absolutely freezing. I sat with our laptop. Honestly, I think all my joints stopped working about an hour into the match, and touching the laptop was like, felt like my hands were just going to stick to it. It was completely frozen. But yeah, I think had we done what we did against Leicester, we would have had really good success. I mean, defending the way that Wolves were, which was kind of a 5-2-3, that's really difficult, I think, against a 3-box-3 shape. Yes, it's matched up, and you can go player for player across the pitch, or man for man across the pitch. But I think you have to have an incredible central centre-back to get away with it. I think you have to have really aggressive, comfortable players in the wide centre-back positions. I think you have to have real pace in the wing-back slots as well. And you're looking at the team they rolled out. Santiago Bueno as a central, and Nelson Semedo as a wide. Like, the chance is there to exploit the spaces, and particularly the pockets, which is what I want to focus on in this segment, because Wolves kind of had this bad combination, which we also have, which is kind of an insistence to try and impact the opposition in build-up. So you see lots of situations where Cunha, João Gomes, and Strand Larsen are kind of committing themselves as high as they can. You've got situations where Andre and Lamina are kind of jumping to support them. They end up very narrow, because a lot of the game it's kind of Strand Larsen a bit deeper, with Cunha and João Gomes ahead pressing, kind of in this very deep kind of box with Strand Larsen in the middle of it. There's massive space then between Andre and Lamina and the two wide centre-backs in Nelson Semedo and Totti Gomes. Now, they handled that a little bit better on the left side of the defence against Kudus and Bowen with Totti Gomes. I think he's a bit more comfortable as a kind of an aggressive centre-back. He's going to step out and complete pressures. The other side with Nelson Semedo, I mean, it just looked lost on that side. All the timing of the jumps was all over the place. Lots of situations where Andre didn't know whether to go or to stay. Then if he doesn't go, then there's a massive gap between Gomes and Andre, which you should be able to get out of build up into that space, commit Andre, then go back out to the wide space and back inside behind. Like, it should be really easy to just kind of like go Emerson inside, back out to Emerson, back inside, and break two lines of pressure like that very, very, very simply, just because of how poorly timed all of the jumps were. And to do it in a bit more detail just over how simple some of this stuff was. I mean, there are so many situations where it was on for us, and it just seemed like, I mean, the two issues that I have really, one, that we didn't set up to exploit this in the best way, because of the fact that there's no central striker. It's very difficult to get players active in the pockets in the way that you want, and often it's Tomas Soucek who's dropping into these spaces, who, bless him, is just not as effective as a guy like Somerville or a Bowen or a Kudus, and I think that's obvious. I think that really goes without saying. And then the other thing is that I actually, maybe slightly more worrying to me, was that the players themselves on the pitch weren't really able to identify the potential of the situations that they were finding in front of them. So some of this stuff is actually really ultimately quite simple. You know, if you're playing, say, up the left-hand side against that combination of Semedo and Doherty, and then Santiago Bueno as kind of a covering centre-back in the middle, again, apologies for coughing, then I think it should be really, really easy to go deep with both the player in the half space and the wing back as such, or the widemost player, which should then push the two players back and give you an opportunity to play into the striker, with the striker dropping off, or the opposite. And when I say go deep, I mean sort of run in behind. or the opposite, which is to drop towards the ball with both the widemost player and the player in the pocket, draw those two players out, then one of them rolls out to make a run in behind. The way that this is often most effective is if the widemost player drops and then goes very quickly. So a quick movement towards the ball, then darts down the line, up the outside. That will push the wing back whilst the wide centre-back is stepping up. And then it should be really easy to make a run with the central striker into the space between the central centre-back, in this case Santiago Bueno, and the wing-back Doherty. And there should be a huge gap between those two players, either for the ball to go in behind, if the wide centre-back Nelson Semedo stays pushing up with the player who's dropping into the pocket to receive, or if Semedo reacts and decides, gets a shout from Bueno or Doherty, quickly get back because Bowen's making that run, the central striker's making that run, then you should get a free pass basically into a player like a Somerville, into a player like a Kudus, who can then turn and run at the defence. This is, a lot of the principles really that we saw Leicester execute very effectively when they were building out against us. So situations where, it's just Christensen and El Khanous, they both go, make runs in behind, and then it's Buonanotte that just comes across from the right-hand side and moves into the centre between our midfield and defence, and is just able, like I say, to turn in vast space in the centre of the pitch. And because Wolves actually ultimately defensively are not a million miles away from where we are, trying to press without the actual requisite intensity to do it, without the back line that's going to step up and support it, without the right profiles in some of the key areas on the pitch to be able to actually execute it, nor really the quality, organisation, decision-making, all of that stuff. It should be really easy to replicate some of those things. And I think we had those situations in the game occurring regularly. And we saw lots of examples of players receiving in the pocket. And they even our good players, even our best players, players who should be really good at operating in these areas, Kudus, Somerville, receiving in the pockets and then dribbling back out into midfield after actually having broken the press. And I think you just see on those examples really, and this is why I say it's more concerning, maybe a bit of a lack of understanding in the group over... Now, and to be fair to them, most of them haven't played this way for the last few years. They've been playing in more of a sort of counter-attacking structure, not necessarily well-versed in these ideas, but not a really good understanding of how to adapt to the opposition and exploit situations as you see them on the pitch. Kind of, the complete opposite of what we were describing with Arsenal in the previous podcast, where you see so many examples of players being able to just look at what's happening on the pitch, identify where they need to move, and then be able to exploit the spaces, which we're kind of... Yeah, exactly the opposite.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that was always probably, if what we were hearing was to be believed in terms of the direction of travel post Moyes, I think that was always going to be pretty high on the checklist of what the manager needs to be able to come in and do from day one, is to take these players who have played a very distinctive style of football that is sort of antithetical to possession-based, sort of how to break presses football, and be able to teach them how to do it very quickly, to sort of oversee what is actually a very difficult transition if you're not going to completely overhaul the squad. And as we've already discussed, we made efforts to bolster the squad, but it's not really been an overhaul because Paqueta, Soucek, Mavropanos, Antonio, Bowen, Kudus have all still been first-team players. So it really did mean that the manager needed to come in and be able to just really get this across instantly and sort of teach them all how to play this new style of football. And I think that's one of the biggest red crosses against Lopetegui's name for me when I'm analysing what he's been able to deliver since arriving. I think you bring him in and he's trying... I think he started out with an intention to try and play this way and then has had to revert back. And at that point, you're kind of doomed because you want your players to be able to go out and execute this game model. But if you're not able to get those messages across and teach them how to do it, then of course they're going to revert back to how they used to play because that's what they know and that's the safest option. So regardless of whether you're telling them to do it on the day or next week or whenever, if they don't feel as though you've managed to teach them that yet, then they're never actually going to try and do it necessarily on the pitch, or they're not going to know what to spot. And then as a collective, they're going to be like, actually, do you know what? The safest thing for us to do is do what we used to do really well. And the transition towards that sort of more progressive, more possession-based, more press baiting, whatever you want to call it, style of football is going to take infinitely longer because none of them feel comfortable actually trying to do it or recognising it.
Yeah, ultimately, I suppose I want to summarize this by saying, had we been able to execute at a higher level, had we been able to understand what we were facing, had we been able to adapt structurally as well from the touchline, I think a central striker would very obviously have helped us
Yeah,
in this game, and more of a five across the front line. I really think this could have been, much like the game that we lost against Crystal Palace, where Elisa and Eze ran riot. It was very difficult for us to defend, largely because we had players like Obona, Zuma, that kind of player in the back line. I think you have a lot of those dynamics on show here for Wolves, and I just think we did a really bad job of getting the better of them. Quickly, before we move on to the next segment, which we're going to do a bit of chat on the midfield, I want to ask you about some of the decisions. Just quick fire. First penalty shout for Wolves, the push from Emerson on Gedesh. Penalty for you or not?
yes, for me, I think very clumsy from Emerson. I think the difficulty is not whether it's a foul for me. I think it's whether the contact is in the box or not. I think it probably is just about. And if that's the case, then yeah, I think it is a penalty. It's very clumsy from Emerson. And unfortunately, you have to be punished for that sort of thing. It's a mistake. And therefore,
Yeah, agree. Carried on into the box. Second penalty shout, Mavropanos on Belgod.
yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, clumsy defending in the box. You get punished for that sort of thing. He stamps on his foot. Bellegarde's got every right to go down. And I don't know why he doesn't, quite frankly. I know that we don't want to see it, but
Our goal, our second goal, foul from, or supposed foul from Mavropanos on Santiago Bueno.
this is probably the most contentious one for me. I think ultimately it probably still is, but I think, as you said at the top, if it's unfortunate for Wolves and they shouldn't necessarily be penalised for it, but I think if they actually had a slightly more dominant centre back, then you probably just don't let Mavropanos do that to you. So 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, but probably by the letter of the law, it is a foul.
And last one from me, shouldn't have been a corner. The first goal comes off Lamina onto Wan-Bissaka. So, yeah, fortunate in many senses. Okay, so we're going to finish the day on midfield. And
Why?
look, I've only got to sort of half time in the performance review before recording this. It is generally quite difficult, actually, to get everything squeezed into the week when we have a Monday night game. It's very difficult to turn everything around in time. And at half time, I would say this is one of the worst performances from a central midfield unit I've seen in a while at West Ham. Edson Alvarez and Tomas Soucek were really quite bad, weren't they?
Yeah, I think Alvarez in particular, but Soucek certainly didn't have his best game. I think, yeah, just Alvarez's decision making just continues to baffle me week on week. It's just such a far cry from where we all thought he was going to. Like, he came to West Ham, started off pretty well. We all loved the tenacity and the sort of shithousery, and then he was being linked to moves to United and Barcelona, and Chelsea were interested, and now I'd be amazed if he even is on any of their databases anymore. They've probably just deleted it and gone, nah, you know what? On further viewing, this ain't gonna work. And yeah, it's unsustainable at this point because everything, the way we want to play, everything kind of hinges on whether the midfield has a good day or a bad day. And if you can't do the out of possession stuff well, which is kind of what he's in there for, if you're not reliable in that respect, and you're offering nothing really in possession, you can't. I think there was one moment of frustration where we've already mentioned about our inability to sort of occupy the spaces and the pockets rather, and capitalize on the space in there. And I think what we were crying out for was, in a way, Andre and actually João Gomez were actually quite good at this when they did get the opportunity to, but someone who can receive on the half turn and then just spin and carry forward into the space that's behind them. But Alvarez was like getting into the spaces, but with his back to goal and then just playing a bounce pass back into the centre back. And then it was like, oh, okay, we'll start the whole thing again. I'm like, bro, there is acres of space behind you. You are meant to be the ball carrier that we bought from Ajax that had the most progressive carrying distance in the Eredivisie. There is space, uncontested space. Just please, just put your head on a swivel. Let it go through your legs, for God's sake, and just do a Macarena jump if you want. Like, just turn around and run forward, and you'll be fine. But yeah, I think it's just, as you said, not dissimilar to what we were saying earlier about just not, just players not being hard coded to recognise these moments. Like there was space. There was space. If he'd have just scanned a little bit more, he would have turned into it. But yeah, I think when you're offering such unreliability out of possession, which is meant to be your big strength, and then you're not noticing the potential upside that you could offer us in possession, there's not really a space in the team for you at that point, because you are just essentially a liability. And I don't like to call anyone a liability, but that is the facts. That is the evidence at the minute. You are a net negative both in and out of possession, and at that point it's just outrageous to even contemplate keeping him in the first team.
Need I say anything? I think that was a comprehensive takedown.
Sorry, mate, if you're listening, but
yeah, it was just a really bad performance, and it's come off the back of a bad season so far. Yeah, so many examples, like you said, of moments where he should have recognised space and been able to turn into it more effectively. I loved him playing into Kudus in the pocket, Kudus coming under pressure, bouncing the ball back to him, and then him passing it straight back to Kudus, who then lost the ball. It's like, what are you doing?
Yeah. And if Kudus is saying, I actually can't handle this pressure right now, you know that it's bad, because that's the man that wriggles it through anything. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think the worst thing, though, over the two games has been his recoveries. I think that's been the most worrying thing. So, uncontested second balls, where all he has to do is take a clean first touch and he's not in any kind of bother. But on so many occasions, the ball has got stuck under his feet and then he's kind of been dancing around on top of it whilst he's then getting pressed. Then to lose the ball and have to foul someone, or just give up a transition when it's your job to be able to look after possession in those moments. I mean, that is ultimately one of the most fundamentally important things that you do as a defensive midfielder for your team, is when the ball goes loose, you look after it. You make sure that first touch is good and the next pass goes to a teammate who can look after possession. He just doesn't do that at the moment. He just gives up the ball for fun in those situations. It makes it really difficult for us, because ultimately, even if we defend long balls well, if Mavropanos or Kilman win the aerial duel, you still have this anxiety that when the ball drops, Alvarez might get there first. In fact, he's often going to get there first, but then he's going to give the ball away straight away, and you're going to lose all of the benefits of having actually won the aerial duel in the first place. You might as well have Strand Larsen knocking it down to João Gomez and forget that Alvarez was even there in the first place. So I think if he's failing at those elements, and those are just really the most basic elements of being a defensive midfielder, I don't really see how he can continue to start. He's been a net negative when he's played in the back line. He's been a net negative when he's played higher in midfield. He's been a net negative when he's played as a floating sort of defensive midfielder between the rest of the midfield and the defence. I don't think he has very much in build-up. He's not good enough in the air. He's not good enough in his ground duels at the moment. He's not recovering the ball. He's getting dribbled on far too many occasions. There's just nothing there right now. And that's really worrying. I think he had a better in possession performance against Leicester, I will say that, but I still think the recoveries were a really, really big problem for him in that game, and for us in that game. And I just think you can't tolerate that in the team. I think it's just too much of a problem for the rest of the team, for the success of a team in a game. And ultimately, I think Lucas Paqueta is really struggling on an individual level this season. But what's the difference? Edson Alvarez is meant to be so much better than Lucas Paqueta defensively. I don't really see that at the moment. I don't see a player who's much better defensively, even for João Gomez's chance. He's too late to notice the run. In fact, he isn't too late to notice the run. He's just too late to start really sprinting to go back with João Gomez, and Gomez gets in front of him and is able to he should score at the back stick because of that indiscretion. There are other situations which we'll come on to in extra time where players joining the press, just late from so many players, Emerson, Kudus, Somerville, situations in the press, just not working hard enough as a team, not working together as a team to press as a unit and win the ball back. And I think ultimately, as the defensive midfielder for the side, as someone as aggressive and as vocal as Edson Alvarez, if you're not leading the team and helping players around you, and actually you're probably the biggest problem in there as someone who is going to abandon post chasing the ball. You look at the last 10 minutes of the match, that's something else that we wanted to speak about here. The way we managed the last 10, 15 minutes of the game was atrocious. You're 2-1 up as a defensive midfielder for the team, just stick in. I mean, it's the most boring analysis, like match of the day level, So I'm Troy Deeney on match of the day. Just, 2 fullbacks, stay next to the centre-backs. Number 6, stay there. Just keep it tight. Lock it down. Make sure you don't concede any chances. It's like the 86th minute. We're under loads of pressure. Now I'm seeing Edson Alvarez making pressing runs that is going past the whole midfield. He's up there with Danny Ings. What are you doing, mate? What planet are you on? I just cannot understand how someone can continue to act in that way with impunity and just keep a spot in the team. It makes no sense. And with Paqueta, you get a lot of the same positional indiscipline. You get bad decisions on the ball. You get a player that's horrendously out of form, to be perfectly honest. I mean, some of the stuff that he did at the end, taking that shot, which Lucas Fabianski, someone who's so calm all the time, it lost his mind. He was screaming at him, what are you doing shooting in that position? Just take the ball to the corner, or at least retain possession. I feel at least, I've got to a point where I at least feel with Paqueta, he's at least going to progress the ball a little bit for us. At least he's going to do that. He might even win ground duels a bit better than Edson Alvarez. In fact, his first touch when he's receiving off of like aerial duels one from the centre-backs or just loose balls in the middle of the pitch, that's probably going to be a bit better too. So, it's just a ridiculous situation to find ourselves in, isn't it? And I feel a bit weird about this because I think up to this point in the season, we've talked about kind of other positions that need addressing. What do we need to do most urgently? And I've kind of gone, well, there's loads of central midfielders. I just don't think we need to do that in January. But it's getting to the point where it's so bad in there and players are playing so poorly in there that if you don't change the manager to try and liven things up, maybe change things and get players in different roles and maybe see a different group and some different form in there, I think you'd have to, because it's so bad that I worry that we'd get drawn into the scrap at the bottom.
Yeah. It's one or the other at the minute, isn't it? And even... based on what we've seen so far from the midfielders, I think I'd be slightly concerned that even whoever comes in, if we do change the manager, might struggle to get a tune out of them because the performance levels have been that far off it. Particularly in the case of Alvarez, like I say, because that actually just feels like a bit of a downward trajectory. It's not necessarily just out of form. It's just that maybe he can't do the things you need him to do at this level. Because he's yet to show it at all on numerous occasions now. So yeah, it is worrying. It is worrying. I worry that ultimately the midfield is still stacked on pure volume wise. So unless you can move someone on to free up a space in midfield, then you kind of are going to have to just hope that a new manager, assuming that happens at some point, is able to galvanise the midfield at least for the final half of the season, and then you can have a bit more of a shuffle around in the summer. But yeah, January feels like a real conundrum now because there's a few positions where I think you could make a case as a priority, but obviously you can't have more than one priority position, particularly in January. So it'll be really, really interesting to see how we try to approach that. And I think a lot of it hinges on who is the manager in the next few weeks. And another reason why I would have been very keen for us to be a little bit more proactive in getting a manager in so they can have a few weeks to assess the squad and then we can work out what we actually need in January. Because if Lopetegui's here at the start of January, we buy something to try and fix it and then sack him, and then there's 2 bits of delayed and shit business rather than just one.
Bournemouth next.
Woohoo!
Remind us where they are in the expected points table, Cal.
In the expected points table, they are second. So based on how they should have performed in each game they've played so far in terms of expected goals against and expected goals for, if everything had gone as one would expect statistically, they would be second in the table, which is frankly insane.
I know Antoine Semenyo's in your fantasy team next week. Right, well, there we are. A bumper pod on Wolves and Leicester. I do apologise if it's been a bit of a grumpy one, but of course, we are very, very, very pleased that we did get a win. We're really pleased we come out on the right side of this game. Like I said, really pleased for the group who desperately wanted to win. Some fantastic individual performances in there that helped drive us on. As a team, we are not at the level that we need to be at to... just to hold any kind of I don't even know how to describe it. It's just the level of quality in the group to be how far off as we are, as far off as we are. It's just, yeah, bemusing. And as a summary point, like we've said on many other occasions this season and summed up here, play like that against most of the teams in the division. Even if you ran that game against Wolves 10 times, I think we'd lose the game against Wolves six times out of 10, 7 times out of 10. And against almost anyone else in the league, you're looking at more 8, 9, 10 times out of 10. Even Leicester, loads of chances. You can't give. I mean, they had 8 shots and 7 of them went down as big chances. You just cannot defend like this in the Premier League. This league is punishing in transition. It's probably the most punishing league in transition in the world. The level of quality when teams get through in space at speed is just so high, and teams don't really make mistakes. And we've been very lucky in many games this season that teams have made loads and loads of mistakes in these situations and haven't punished us ruthlessly. Let's hope something changes in the space between this game and the next game, because Lord knows it needs to if we want to get a positive result against Bournemouth. Thank you, Cal. Thank you for listening. Join us on Extra Time, where we're going to talk about the performances in this match and in the Leicester match. We'll talk at length about Mikel Antonio. Might even talk a little bit about Graham Potter. So, yeah, look forward to seeing you there. And if not, see you next week.